All right, so what we're looking at is the main form, the risk assessment form. Now, risk assessments, for those of you who haven't seen the original risk assessment module, are made up of a risk assessment itself that's linked to a series of templates. So the idea behind this is what you do is you create a number of standard templates that you can draw on every time you create a new risk assessment. And it means that if you have a risk assessment that has the same sorts of risks in it, you don't have to recreate these risks every time you create a risk assessment. Now, for those of you who have never seen Viking, I just want to show you a couple of things about how you can manipulate data. For those of you who have seen Viking or have listened to me talk before on this point, apologies. I'll be really quite brief here. The views in Viking are somewhat different to the views that you might have encountered in previous versions of MyOsh, and what they are is reports in their own right. So what you're able to do is drag columns around. You can filter on them if you like. You can filter on multiple values in any of these columns. And once you've done all of this, what you're able to do over here is save the view so that later on, in a drop-down list of views, you can actually go and view your favorite view of the data that you've created. Okay, so what's a hazard template? Well, currently, what we're looking at is risk assessments, not templates. So let's go and look at templates. These are the templates that Adrian was referring to. We've prepared a number of these. They come with the product. What you're able to do here is you're able to go and find out, if you were asked, how many risks you've gone and you're currently managing for, let's say, health. And by dropping down on the list, you can click on health, click done. And what it will do is it'll filter on all of the health risks together with unwanted events, company controls. So what's actually in one of these? Well, if we open one up, what you've got in here is some standard fields: the unwanted event, the company controls, an initial and residual risk rating. Now, bear in mind, these are templates. So what we're saying here is for the entire organization, what you've done is you've created a standard document with a standard initial risk rating and a standard residual risk rating and some standard company controls. It doesn't mean that you have to use this every time you create a risk assessment in a particular area. But what it does mean is that you can grab this particular risk and you can put it into a risk assessment and then change it in the risk assessment. And it means you don't have to go and type all this out every time you create a new risk assessment. So let's go and have a look at a risk assessment. We'll just enlarge this a little. One of the things you can do with Viking is resize the screen, and it'll remember how large it is. What we've done here is we've created a risk assessment for a particular area of the business. Now, there might be something happening in Melbourne that's not happening in Western Australia, and you might want to add additional controls into existing risks or even create new risks. So if we scroll down over here, what we've got is a list of the associated risks for this risk assessment. And what we're effectively looking at when we click on select is a list of all of these that we saw a moment ago. So when I click on select, what I'm going to see is a drop-down list of all of these. And I can then select them and put them into this table inside this particular risk assessment. So if we have a look at these, the table has the same sort of functions in it. So if you wanted to, what you could do is you could say, I only want to see the financial ones, thanks. and that will filter on whatever you've decided to filter on. You tick whatever you need, you click add selected, and when you submit, what it does is it adds these additional risks into this table for this risk assessment. Now remember, what I said was there's a difference between having a template and having a document that you've now created in the risk assessment module. Although you've selected a hazard template, this is now a copy or a clone of whatever it was that you selected here. So what you're able to do is you're able to go into one of these documents and change them for this particular assessment. So if I go and look at poor cash flow, I can click on that document, it opens it, and I've got all of the controls that were in my poor cash flow template over here. They're all here, but I might find that because something special is happening, I need to add something new. Now what this does is it changes this particular risk for this risk assessment. It does not affect the hazard template. If you want to change the template, you can go into the template and change that because you've identified that this new control should be applicable across the business whenever you do a risk assessment of this type. You can also, of course, use your matrix to change the initial and residual risk ratings. We've set them, but you might not agree with them. You can change them entirely. You can change any aspect of it. And again, it's not going to change the initial template unless you actually go and change the template yourself. Now, when we're looking at a risk assessment, what we're looking at is this table, and we can scroll across the table and see all of these fields, which effectively are the fields in this template view. But if we want to see this in a way that's more appealing to the eye, what we've got down the bottom is an option to export this to Word. Now, what you can do is you can provide us with some standard template that looks a little like the one I'm going to show you now. You can supply us with your logo, with your risk matrix. And when you click this, what it does is it exports the data in this table to a Word document. Now, we'll just make this a little smaller and just put these side by side so we can see what we're looking at. So effectively, what we've got here is a document that makes the risk assessment look appealing to the eye. And effectively, what we're doing here is we've built a table and we're shoving all of these records in the table into the table in the Word document. So I've got poor cash flow, I've got impact and supply of product. Here I've got all of this. Here are all my controls and all of the other documentation besides. And as I scroll down, I'm looking at each line inside that risk assessment. The other thing that you've got in here is the ability to put in some comments. Now, anybody who goes in here and puts in comments, once they save them, there's an audited list of all comments, everybody who ever made one, the time and date that they made them, and what they said. And if you store photographs of people, the photograph will be there as well. Now let's go and have a look at some of the graphs that we've been putting together. Now, bear in mind that we've put together a few standard graphs, and should you require anything in particular, we can do this for you. Just a conversation with some of our analysts, and we can build things that are specific to your organization. So these are some fairly straightforward ones. Risks by category, risks by initiator of the assessment. These are fairly standard. If we go in here, we've got things like risk rating consequence by category. So effectively what we're saying here is, of all of those templates that we had that are health related, 37% of them are catastrophic on the initial risk rating. But after the controls have been put in place, there aren't any catastrophic ones. So we can see that what we're doing in terms of putting in controls is working. But of course, those values that we've put in might not be your values. So you might have to go into those hazard templates and change those. The same sort of thing for likelihood. And again, for risk reduction. So we have a graph here, which is effectively the sum of all of the initial risk ratings. And down below, the sum of all the residual risk ratings. So you can get some sort of idea on the risk reduction process that you've put in place for health, financial, and the other categories of risk.